It is almost a matter of when and not if when you will have an online cyber incident. I'm talking about hacking or theft of your data. Among urology practices, we already have seen just in 2019 and 2020, a couple of big events. In the case of, oh gosh, video is interrupted. Oh no. In the case of Ohio medical practice, they had to pay $75,000 in ransom. In the Fierce Healthcare report, they were hacked and ransomware was the issue there. In addition, at Brandywine Urology, this is in January 2020, they also suffered a hacking incident. Thankfully, they were able to recover as well. So this is nothing new, and I'm very excited to talk about this topic with Jeffery Daigrepont. He is a senior VP with the Coker Group, and he has written a book about electronic health records and how to run your practices better. He specializes in healthcare automation, systems integration, and cybersecurity operations and deployment of enterprise information systems for large integrated delivery networks and medical practices. I have known Jeffery for probably over 15 years, and last time we were able to catch up in real life was 3 years ago at the AUA. So welcome to the program, Jeffery, and thank you so much for taking time on a beautiful Saturday morning to discuss this very important topic with all of us.
Yeah, thank you, John. As always, it's an honor and privilege anytime we get the opportunity to interact. And kudos to you and all your success. I've always been very impressed with what you've been able to accomplish without the pressures of turning to employment and venture capitalist money, staying private. I reference your practice as that beacon to many physicians who are looking for wisdom. So congratulations for all you've accomplished without having to join an employment organization. So,
yeah, I'm definitely a rare breed to yes. be in solo private practice. Now, to be clear, I had a advertising screen of you saying that confessions of a hacker. Just to be clear, you are not a hacker. we are going to talk about things that hackers think about, and what are the things that private practices, urology practices can do to somewhat mitigate our risk. With everybody during the current public health emergency, with so many people being offloaded to online remote office work, right. What are some of the things that you're seeing and that are of concern?
Well, I think the first is that because a lot of these employees are working from their house, in most instances, those home networks are A, using residential grade technology and equipment, and B, they're not part of the domain. They're oftentimes using their personal computers or devices that they may have already had at home. Nothing wrong with that. It just creates a higher risk profile because those home networks are not nearly secure as our corporate environments are. They don't always have. And in those home networks, you also have all the kids, on various network platforms. You have the Internet of Things that get attached to those networks. Those are very high risk. Ring doorbells, coffee makers, things akin to that, your light bulbs. Those don't have operating systems. So hackers know that those devices oftentimes are entry points into networks, and there's not really much you can do to even control that because there's no way you can put a virus protection or cybersecurity protection. Those devices, and a lot of those devices come from overseas, so they're already have weaknesses that we're not even aware of.
Yeah, a lot of us are using home internet using a device like what I'm showing on the screen here. It's a wireless router, and often people don't update their security on these wireless devices, firmware updates and signature updates, so it makes them vulnerable as well, just on the access device. And like you said, Internet of Things, you can just buy, like, for instance, a Ring or a Wise or something like that, install it into your, or actually a refrigerator nowadays, they connect to your internet. Thermostats. I've got a couple of thermostats at home that connect to the wireless network. So knowing that there could be malicious code built into those devices potentially, right? So that's also a concern. And also, you said the kids connecting to the home network and then who knows what they're clicking on or downloading. If you don't have a robust cybersecurity infrastructure at home, then you potentially could bring risk to your organization if you're remotely connecting from home to the office.
Well, a real popular low-level scam is, all those jump drives that we get for free at conferences that we just walk by and grab off the tables.
Yeah.
Well, those jump drives oftentimes have a lot of malware loaded on them because they're bought in large quantities from overseas companies, sometimes off of Amazon. So you don't really even know. So it's little things like that. You just don't think that sometimes when you're attaching something to a network, where does it come from? Who's the manufacturer? Is it safe? Even apps, there's even fake apps that will appeal to kids that are deliberately downloaded, and they're Trojan horses too.
Yeah, just like in real life, sticking anything unknown into your computer system is always risky.
Right.
Always think twice, or do a maybe connect it to a device that is not connected to your network, and then do a scan on it first before you put it to your network.
Right. Well, and the really advanced, if you're going to issue devices to your employees, more times than not, unless they have a real need for external information, you should just simply disable those USB drives to prohibit attaching or lock down the network, so those control settings don't even allow to install the Internet of Things. Because people are a lot of consumers, right? We have these devices. We like our gadgets. You of all people love your gadgets. So they make it very easy to just pick something up off the shelf and attach it to a network these days without even realizing that it might have implications.
Yeah, so what you're talking about is having like a physical device on like a notebook computer, for instance, and you go into, or IT team person would go into the BIOS, or basic input output system, and then using software to shut down access or connectivity with USB devices to minimize the risk of malware intrusion. And
even beyond cybersecurity, we've seen a number of issues of sabotage and employees downloading, fee schedules and documents that they may be taking to a competitor. So even from a compliance and minimizing fraud and abuse, it's good. Many people don't know this, but 40% of all cybersecurity incidents actually come from within the practice. It's not external. Not to terrify anybody. And these aren't always rogue employees. It's sometimes an employee who was compromised and doesn't even realize they were compromised, but the hack is occurring within the practice. So it's not even an external penetration of your firewall. They're not cracking code. They're not sitting in your parking lot trying to get access to your Wi-Fi. They just basically taken over the control of one of your employees' machines, and sometimes they're acting as if they're that employee. And so that's one of the challenges. There is very inexpensive software. You can Google what's called Insider Threat, and it's pretty simple software. Basically, what Insider Threat software will do is it just monitors our behavior, right? So it knows something isn't right if you're online, if your biller is online at 3 a.m. in the morning. That's just not normal, or it should be normal. Or at least you should have the conversation the next morning and said, hey, I noticed you were in our system at 3 a.m. in the morning. Was that you? A lot of times it wasn't them, it was somebody else. But the insider threat monitoring is looking at that traffic. It knows if an IP address from Russia is attempting to come in, and it's proactively seeking and destroying. The worst thing you can do is just wait for the incident, and then you have to do all the forensic. The trend today is to be more proactive. We're getting these attacks. They're going to continuously come in. And so instead of waiting for it to happen, let's go seek and destroy and find them, and let's go hunt for them. Let's go actually hunt for the hackers, and be take more defense.
There's technology being developed right now. I sit in these investment committee meetings for our angel investing group, and one technology was this guy was creating a technology to proactively look at the conversations in the dark web, and looking for the things such as zero-day vulnerabilities and then attacks. So whenever there's a lot of chatter about a particular zero-day vulnerability, they will alert IT individuals. The problem is there's so many things that need to be done, especially if you're running a large infrastructure. Where do you begin doing the patch? Like, which is the top of the the list? Which one do you hit first? Because anything you do, you may have to shut down a server or two. It may affect the end user, and it impacts on productivity. So it's kind of like, well, security versus productivity.
Right. Well, and even in a smaller practices such as yours, you could have, I would be shocked if you don't have at least 50, 60 devices attached to your network when you start looking at all the computers, the fax machine, the copiers, if people's cell phones connect to your Wi-Fi, you have probably Wi-Fi for your practice there. So a lot of components. So one of the very simple methods that you can use, and this is very inexpensive too, you can do what's called a vulnerability scan. So rather than attempting to hire expensive IT engineers to go machine by machine by machine, because the vulnerability is that if just one machine on your network has an outdated operating system or the Norton virus has expired, that machine is now exposed. And what happens as leaders and as owners, we don't always think about the maintenance and the upkeep and making sure that we stay current of all those patches. And so what a vulnerability scan will do is it will rapidly crawl through your entire network, everything attached to your network, and it comes back and it tells you these 3 machines are outdated. This one has a virus already installed. This one has a screensaver that had a Trojan horse in it. And it starts giving you a list of threats, and it ranks your threats from the most highest, most vulnerable, most costly down to the lowest. So at least when it comes back, you can prioritize what you address first and begin remediating. You should know that any network, including our own company, we run one once a year, they never come back 100%. I mean, they always find risk because every day it's just one click away from an employee taking the wrong email, clicking on the wrong link, having themselves compromised. So it's recommended that you run that annually. Some people do it semi-annually, those scans.
I started our discussion with a couple of incidents of ransomware attacks on urology practices. It takes one not intentional, but maybe unintentional click to a link, and then the Trojan horse or ransomware software is downloaded to that device, and that software can propagate to any of the attached network nodes. What are some of the things that you can suggest to help mitigate that particular risk? Because it seems like ransomware is one of the biggies. They don't seek to steal your data, but they want to have you pay in Bitcoin, right. $75,000, for instance, for this Northeast Ohio urology practice.
So not to oversimplify it, but the easiest way you can avoid a ransomware is just have a secure backup offsite removed from your network, even if it's on the old school, backed up on a disk, kept in a fireproof safe at one of the doctor's homes or somewhere outside, because because the building could burn too, right? There's a threat. So just have the backup, and if you have the data, you can tell them to go pound sand. You don't have to be threatened. Now you're still going to have an incident. You still will have to deal with the breach, and there are consequences to that. But at least within seconds, if you have a hot site somewhere, your office can be up and running. A lot of doctors just take these very inexpensive external hard drives. There you can get a 2-3 terabytes now for under $100, and you just put your data on there. If you want to really spend a little bit of extra money, not a lot, then take a second server that's fully replicated, and then you just drop that in, and you're literally back in business. Because the other thing that's disruptive about a ransomware is, think of the lost productivity cost of 4 or 5 urologists not being able to see patients or being their productivity delayed. That can be in the tens of thousands of dollars depending on the size of the practice. And it's embarrassing, and you're going to have to notify patients, and you're going to have to probably agree to some corporate integrity agreement from the feds where you'll have to submit to auditing, which then opens you up to other things. So it's if you can avoid it, it's in your best interest to do so.
Anytime you have a breach of PHI, protected health information, greater than 500 members or patients, you have to report to HHS, Health and Human Services, and the Office of Civil Rights. As a matter of fact, they have a wall of shame. They post a list of medical practices or medical providers that have had breaches. I was thinking some of the easiest ways for ransomware to get in is through email. Believe it or not, not everyone needs an email to an organization. So one of the things that you can do is to decrease that the number of emails that you provide to employees. For those who don't really need email, who are not working remotely, why do they have an email, right? So that's one. And number two, you can also create a fake, like you can test your own employees' knowledge regarding whether or not they are aware or they can spot a phishing attack or an email that is not legit. Some of them are really obvious, like the Nigerian African prince who has $1 million that you just need to send $10,000 and they'll get that, release that to you.
Right. Yeah, those somebody needs to take that $1 million. I'm surprised no one's taking them up on it. Yeah. Let me make a real quick comment on the incident versus breach. Just because you have an incident does not mean you have a breach. So be very careful to first investigate your incident before you unintentionally turn yourself in. We had a situation where a client thought a laptop was stolen, and they turned themselves in, and they're now paying a $60,000 fine because that laptop did not have encryption on it. Turned out the laptop was just missing. They found it later. But because they turned themselves in, what do you think the feds wanted to know? Well, did you have encryption on it? Can we locate it? And when they started not being able to answer the questions correctly, that's when and now they're subject to a 5-year corporate integrity agreement where they have to submit to audits. As far as the email goes, here's a fascinating stat that's kind of terrifying. When we identify an incident, such as an employee that has clicked on that they shouldn't have clicked on, and I'll tell you some ways that you can spot fakes in a second. And by the way, most organizations deliberately run phishing campaigns on themselves just to test their employees' knowledge. It's kind of like how you train your kid, don't talk to strangers, and then sure enough, somebody says, do you want to play with the puppy? And they get distracted. So some of these email campaigns or phishing attacks might look very legit. And it may even be something that the employee feels obligated because they're trying to help you, the physician. Hey, this is FedEx. We've been trying to deliver this very urgent package to your doctor. It's critical that we get this to you. Unfortunately, it's been returned. If you could please click on this link and provide better information. Hey, I'm a patient trying to submit my insurance. The claim's rejected. We want to help you get paid. And so their instinct is, well, I got to respond. It's part of my job. My duty is to help this patient out. And so the hackers will deliberately craft messages that are designed to distract your thinking or designed to make you think. There's actually a term for it. It's called social engineering, where they study the individual and then they craft a hack that is pertaining to that person. For example, I've seen there was a case that you see this post a lot on Facebook, right, where the person says, please pray for my loved one just diagnosed with cancer. Well, some of these sickos will craft a fake website for ovarian cancer and send them the link to donate to that charity in honor of your sister. Well, these people have that emotion riding high, and they want to help. So they take advantage of our information that we put out there. If somebody sent me a link about, you see my Facebook, I love grilling. I cook, right? If I get a recipe, I'm probably clicking on it if it looks good. So they know our hobbies, they know our interests, and those emails are deliberately intended to entice us to click. But here's the terrifying stat. When you identify an email that was a threat and somebody clicked on it, and you start asking the employees who all clicked on this email, you'd be surprised how many times employees will not come forward and admit that they clicked on it. You won't find out how many people actually clicked on it until you do your investigation. So one thing I want to really encourage doctors is never, under any circumstances, be upset with an employee who comes to you. Have a culture of openness, transparency, let people admit their mistakes. Don't ever allow an employee to be in trouble for admitting that they clicked on something they shouldn't have, because the worst thing you can do is have that employee hide that. If they made an honest mistake, they need to let everybody know. Nobody's going to get in trouble.
Yeah, the sooner you recognize it, the faster you can disconnect that computer from the network so that the virus does not even propagate. It's kind of like cutting out cancer before it metastasizes.
Right. And in fact, a low-level response to an intrusion like that is we will quarantine every machine. That's why it's so important for the employees to raise their hand and say, yes, I accidentally clicked on this, or yes, I thought it was a real email and I clicked on it, because those are the machines we're going to quarantine first, and that's where our investigation. The reason why we know employees don't tell is because we look at the logs. We can see who. I mean, we're going to get your logs, and we will know what you clicked on, and it never fails. There's usually 5 to 10% of the employees that actually clicked on it, but they didn't admit to it.
Yeah, mitigation. So I always tell whenever I see an IT professional, I see a lot of them in my practice. I always tell them that the biggest risk is humans.
Right.
Humans are the biggest risk when it comes to IT security. If we can eliminate humans, then our risk will be greatly decreased. There will be no
Yeah.
loss, no accidental clicking.
And I think that's where that education piece. I mean, people oftentimes think that hacking is some Russian code cracking wizard that is trying to break your passwords. More times than not, it's actually not a hack. They have compromised one of your employees somewhere else, usually outside of the practice. So if my Starbucks app gets compromised, what are the odds that that employee is using a password that's very similar to the password they're using at your practice? It's not hard these days to find out where that employee works. In fact, they usually post it right there on their Facebook page that they work for, or they made a post, or they checked in somewhere. So the next time, so what happens is if they have, in fact, there's a website called Have I Been Pawned, PAWN. If you go to that and you put your email address in, it will tell you all the times you've been personally compromised. And you will see not only your personal information, it will show you that they also already have your password. So once they get your email address and your password, and you're using a cloud-based EMR, they then just sign on. So there is no hack. They're just basically signing on as you. Now, one way you can completely stomp that out, or at least to a high degree, is dual authentication, where you, if there is any computer, like if I came to your office and attempted to log into my network from one of your computers, which I could do, my network is going to instantly know that that's not a machine it trusts. It's never seen that machine before. Why is it coming from this domain? We don't trust this machine. And it's going to send me a personalized PIN to say, if you want in from that machine, you have to then enter this PIN. And the only way that PIN can come out is it has to come to my personal cell phone. So for the hacker to be successful, they'd have to know my password, know my username, and be holding my cell phone. So that's a pretty good, check and balance system to make sure that no one, because people do lose their passwords all the time, and that dual authentication is one way to minimize that.
Yeah, definitely. Or having number one thing is to have a pass. Don't reuse your passwords. Come on, it's so simple, right, guys. Don't reuse your passwords. Create unique and very long passwords. And if the software allows you to put a space, you hit the space bar. If it allows you to put a space in that password, please do so. So make the passwords really long, make them unique, and just when you connect to public Wi-Fi networks, know that that is not secure. You may want to connect to a VPN before you start logging on into other networks. VPN is a virtual private network.
I'll make a little confession here. I actually have a very simple password that I use for all my silly things that I have on, like my pizza app. So the worst thing you're going to do is you might email me, you might send me a pizza that I didn't order. So just be smart about it. Your passwords for your office, your investment accounts, your banking accounts. They should be super complicated and very long, and you should rotate them frequently as well too. But if you want to, simplify your passwords, there's also apps that you can get that can manage passwords. Your iPhone now has a really good system that helps you with your thumbprint, so you don't always have to remember it. Keep them, if you're going to write them down, put it in a safe so that piece of paper doesn't get lost. Just be mindful. And by the way, they already know the vast majority of what people use as passwords. It's password. That's the most common password, is actually the word password, or 1234 ABC. That simple things like that. Or they'll figure out your kid's name and your birthday, and they know what the common use of passwords are. And so if you're using those simple passwords, they're already 80% there cracking it.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to be subject to dictionary attacks. Those are super, super simple.
Right. Well, and they even have programs now that can run algorithms of random characters that can, throw millions of opportunities at the password to see if they can get it. You have something also called man in the middle, or man in the keyboard. So again, if one of the employees got hacked, they could potentially log a keystroke logger on your network. And so basically what they're looking for is at 8 a.m. they can see everybody that logs in and those keystrokes were logged or captured. They don't actually have the password, but they have all the characters coming across your network, and so that's a good clue, and they can usually figure it out from there.
Boy, key logging is so old school.
Right? Yeah. Still there though.
All right. For those of you who are watching this live, please feel free to ask any questions. And actually, I have Dr. Wallen asking for a non-IT person, what kind of data do you need to have on these backups that we mentioned?
Well, PHI data, protected health information, is pretty broad these days, and it includes your financial data too, so social security numbers, patients' addresses, and whatnot. I think anything that pertains to the business needs to be backed up, your financials, your EMR. Now, if you're using a cloud-based vendor, which most are these days, you should have a service level agreement with that vendor guaranteeing that it's not only backed up, but it's encrypted. And you should also make sure that your contract ensures that they're responsible for any breaches. If you're using an on-premise server, which a few are still today, then you would want to work with your local IT firm or get somebody who could help you set up a backup server or that inexpensive external hard drive that we were just discussing. But just make sure that that backup server or external hard drive is separated from the network. These hackers know that they're going to lock down your primary, but they're also going to go look for your backup, and they're going to try to destroy that in the process too.
So basically, pretty much anything that you need to run your software. Just imagine if your practice were to burn down. Just always think in terms of physical destruction, software destruction. What? How are you going to restore your data? So then you have to think about RTO and RPO when it comes to data replication, because you can think in terms of this way. So if the server goes down, you can have a redundant server, but how much are you going to pay to have that immediate failover? Or if the place burns down, then you can have an offsite backup, but then it takes you a long time to restore that information so you can get back to work. The other way you can do it is to have a remote type of a setup, so you can remotely log into a cloud-based type of a server, so you can kind of cripple along until you restore your infrastructure here at the office. So there are a lot of different levels of security and redundancy, but it just depends on how much money you want to pay and how fast you want to get back to productivity.
Yeah, I would recommend anyone who's looking to create redundancy actually look into, establishing what they call a disaster recovery plan, because it will cover things like water damage and fire and other natural disasters, and address how you create redundancy, not just in your servers, but also your network, your connectivity. Like in a lot of our clients, they will have their primary internet provider through AT&T, but they may have a Verizon hotspot or some so they have some redundancy. It's not corporate grade, but it keeps you connected nonetheless. I actually have split my iPad and my phone between two different carriers, because there are some instances where I'm in parts of the country where there's not good cell coverage. So I like having a second carrier that might give me some diversity in coverage as well. One quick point: remember that it's not just your servers for your EMR. We are spreading PHI all over the place. So every time you copy something with your copier, if it's a digital copier, that copier is holding about the last 100 pages that went through that. It has an internal hard drive too, and it holds memory. So when you ship that copier off for repair, or you return the lease, that hard drive needs to be wiped, or you need to, don't ever donate old computers. I mean, I know you want to do that sometimes, but even if you think you wiped it, if it's not wiped appropriately, they can restore and sometimes get bits of information. I've even seen them take smashed up hard drives and find pieces of the hard drive and have been able to get information just off of a little piece.
Well, off of my personal timeline, you know what I do to my hard drive.
Right.
So first of all the hard drives come out of my computer, the old computers. And number two, now I don't smash them or shoot my hard drives. I take out I open it up and I just physically destroy the platters that hold the information. So good luck trying to recover that.
Yeah, you know what? I've done that too. I was surprised at how strong that metal is. I don't know what it's made out of, but it's not something you can easily bend or destroy.
No,
you can smash it with a hammer, but I did that once, and it was some of the strongest metal I think I've ever interacted with.
Yeah, because it's spinning at 72,000, sometimes 15,000 RPM. So if the metal or the material is not really strong, it's just going to shatter over time, and we can't have that happen. Now we
Yeah, so
talked.
don't donate it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, don't donate it. And the copier and the scanning features of modern copiers, it is definitely a concern because it likes to store the information first, and then it'll fax, and then it'll copies just so that it's faster for the user
Right.
to interface with that device. Now we talked about prevention, we talked about mitigation. We haven't covered what are some of the things, like what happens afterwards, the liability issues, and how what are some of the things that we can do to mitigate the liability, or who's going to be liable? Do we have enough coverage and all that stuff?
Well, cybersecurity insurance is a must-have, and it's not that expensive. I mean, oftentimes it can be added to your existing policy. You have to be careful sometimes to read those very carefully because they do, like most insurance, figure out ways to exclude themselves. So if the incident occurred because you were lacking in your responsibilities and duties, they could use that as an excuse not to to pay. So it's a lot like other types of insurance. I mean, you have to there's going to be some investigation. If I take out life insurance and didn't disclose some risk, and they would come and look and see if I have pre-existing conditions. So they're going to look at the same way if you have an incident. What is nice about having the cybersecurity is because they are on the hook financially, they're usually willing to throw a lot of help your way to help you remediate and investigate and try to minimize the threat, because they don't want to obviously have to pay for the damages. So that's another service that they oftentimes will offer. Your IT company can play a very big role. I would encourage you, and this is not being critical of local IT people. We do this. We have a third party that checks our own IT people, even though they're great. They do a phenomenal job, but they can make honest mistakes, and it's hard to grade your own papers. So if you have a third party, and you can use one of these vulnerability scans, it's not that expensive. But on occasion, check your own work, because you just never know, especially after a major upgrade, or if you had replacing some equipment. Those are usually times where, if you're going to make an honest mistake or leave a port open or leave a switch open, those are the times that it will happen. And so it's usually good to do a quick refresh at that time. And then I think last but not least, and this is something we do for all of AUA, you can send me your vendor contract, and I will absolutely inspect that contract to make sure that you are protected from a cybersecurity standpoint. Most are not. Most vendors are excluding themselves from any and all responsibilities, even in cases where they are totally responsible for your environment. And I think that is a big surprise for many practices when an incident does happen, because the whole reason why you would go to a cloud vendor is you want to relieve yourself of that burden and obligation responsibilities. You're hoping someone else can take that off your shoulders. They will, but they're not responsible. So we need to make sure we get an amendment to your contract that holds them accountable, or at least at a very minimum, let their insurance go first before your insurance kicks in.
Yeah, that's definitely very important. 15 years ago, when I first met you, I was actually looking for an EHR, and I implemented, and I'm still using that EHR. But you helped my practice really put an addendum to that contract, if you will, so that my interests are protected, the practice's interests are protected, and not just one-sided. And you have the advantage of having seen a lot of different EHR vendors' contracts, so you have a much broader view regarding what you can include from a purchaser's perspective that will be to our advantage, so that it's not one-sided.
Well, and another thing that vendors will do, and it's very common, there's nothing wrong with this, but they'll sometimes subcontract your work or support to sometimes other countries. And if that's the case, they have an obligation to notify you if even there's an incident among their third parties that will could potentially threaten the safety of your patients. You also need to make sure you have a BAA in place, a business associate agreement. That is the sort of mother of all documents that will hold both parties accountable to each other. And it goes both ways. You should also notify your vendor if there was an incident that they need to help you remediate or shut down, because they rely on you to let them know of suspicious activity too. It goes both ways.
Well, it sounds great. Lots of information shared this morning. We're running a little long, so any last parting words that you would like to share?
Yeah, just education. I mean, there's no amount of technology that I know of that can prevent you or your employee from clicking on something you shouldn't. I wish there was. That has to come with education. Do the phishing campaigns on yourself. Do the scans. They're very inexpensive, and I think it will give you a lot of information on how to minimize your threats. And of course, as always, there's never a charge to let us look at your contract. I enjoy doing that because it's the best way we can help each other is create transparency. If we know where there are risks and threats, we can share that information and all benefit accordingly.
Well, thank you so much, Jeffrey, for coming on and discussing this very, very important topic in today's age.
You bet. Thanks, Doctor.
All right, folks, if you are interested in some of Jeffrey's services, I will put his contact information in the video description. He works with the Coker Group. I've worked with him. I've known him for probably 15 years, and he has definitely helped me on multiple fronts in making sure my practice runs smoothly and efficiently and safely. So thank you so much for watching. Have a good day.